Thanks a lot for coming along to hear about what we've been, what we've developed in the form of the Farmer Information Exchange. Data can be a very dry subject, and I say that as a physicist. I'm a theoretical physicist, which means I don't collect data, but I worry about it. However, I think the argument that we're going to present is that data and knowledge together could well be one of the most important assets that farmers are in possession of. And the platform that we are trying to talk about, that we're going to talk about today, is all about how to enable farmers to have agency over that knowledge and how to use it to help each other and how to use it to help them connect. I am a soil scientist, actually an astrophysicist originally, but took up soil because it's so much harder. Physics is easy, soil is really hard because it's living. Yeah, it is. But it's fascinating material to work with. But as I got towards the end of my career, because I'm definitely closer to death than I am my PhD, I wanted to see if we could really drive some impact, because I'd done the science stuff, you know, I'd published lots of papers, I'd got lots of money for grants and run lots of projects, research institutes and things, but had never felt that I'd really made much of an impact. And part of the reason for moving from astronomy into soil was to make an impact. And one of the issues we're going to talk about today is the fact that science isn't really very well connected to farming. And we're hoping that this platform can help enable that. I've been to a number of presentations today where people have worried about Regen ag and what it means and what does soil health mean and all this stuff. And the way I look at it, if you're going to farm well, you take account of the fact that everything is connected. What you're doing connects. Farming is probably unique in the extent to which it connects to everything. Now, the way we've done science and the way that farmers have been encouraged to do farming, we've tended to compartmentalize our thinking. And we focused on one or two things. In science, we specialize into disciplines. Soil in particular, we think about the physics, we think about the biology, we think about the chemistry. We don't think about the system as a whole, which is what myself and Andy have been working on for the last 10 years or so. The challenge is when everything is connected, it really changes the way that you manage. And the reason for that is when everything's connected, you can no longer predict. Now, either it's impossible to predict or it's just extremely hard to predict. And the question is still open in terms of agriculture. I suspect that it will be impossible in principle to predict. So if you can't predict, how do you manage? How do you get better at what you do? And the way you do that is by trial and error. It's what farmers have already done forever. They do stuff and then they try something a wee bit different next year. And then they maybe do something a wee bit different the year after that. And it's called learning by doing. And farmers have been doing that since farming was invented. The issue that I have with that is that I'm kind of worried about the fact that climate and biodiversity and diet and health, water insecurity, food insecurity, all of these are really quite existential and pressing issues. We don't have a lot of time and we've got a hell of a lot to do. So how do you create impact at scale fast if you can only progress through learning by doing? So if you're a farmer working on your own, every year you can try something different. That means it takes you 10 years to go through 10 experiments, if you like. And even longer if your experiment is a cropping cycle. But if you work and connect with 10 other farmers, then it turns out that the rate of innovation, or the rate at which you can generate new ideas and get to the answer quicker, is 100 times faster. It's not 10 times faster. And when you've got 100 farmers, it's 10,000 times faster. Now, we're developing this platform to capitalize on that value curve, the fact that the rate of innovation can accelerate. It's not exponentially, it's hyperbolically, which means it goes infinite within a finite amount of time if you've got enough people participating. Now, the crucial thing about participation is that people have to trust the platform that they're working on, and especially with data and knowledge, that can be used against you if you're a farmer. And we know that there are lots of organizations out there that are keen to get hold of your data and use it for their own ends, and you get no value back from that. So the way we've decided to think about setting up this platform is together with farmers. And it will be co-owned by farmers. And we're not talking just about farmers in the UK. We've got projects in Africa, in New Zealand, in Malaysia, in Bhutan, and there are plenty of other opportunities in other places as well. We just don't have the bandwidth at this stage for more. And we're working with the World Farmers Organization, which represent 1.5 billion farmers globally at the UN and other organizations like the OECD, where the global farming voice needs to be heard. So the intention is that this will be a digital cooperative, an open innovation ecosystem where farmers share and innovate together and add value. In the same way that an iPhone is a platform on which loads of people make money by writing apps and sharing knowledge and all kinds of ways that weren't imagined when the iPhone was invented. We're hoping that we can create an innovation platform in which farmers can innovate and get value from their knowledge and data instead of giving it away for free. And by setting it up as a digital cooperative, it can't be bought. So Google can't come along and offer a huge amount of money and get all that data, because it will always be farmers' data. The farmer will always have control over it. And that's the way we're trying to set it up. We've got 3 speakers to talk a little bit more, give different perspectives on how this might work. The point is that this is a co-creation with farmers. So if there's people out there that want to get involved, this is your platform. We're not trying to make something and then make you use it. It's a co-creation process. It's your platform. And we believe it will help farmers on that journey to better farmers and hopefully to better farming, and hopefully connect science in the way that it needs to be connected to farming. I'll let them all introduce themselves, but we've got Kiryon and Skippen, who will give a kind of a business perspective, because this has to be self-scaling and self-sustaining. We can't rely on the vagaries of public funding for this. We've tried, it doesn't work. We've got a farmer, we've got Evie Hunter, and we've got a scientist and a good friend of mine, Andy Neal, from Rothamsted Research. But I'll let them introduce themselves. Kiryon.
Thank you, John. Yeah, my name is Kiryon Skippen. I'm CEO of a business called TMAG UK. TEAM stands for Transformational Estate and Agricultural Management. Background, grew up in farming, scientific degree, worked in industry, also business at different scales, and the finance industry. So then that comes really to sort of being able to put different hats on and sort of look from different perspectives and enable the connectivity that we're talking about, and realizing what the possibilities are if you can connect those thought processes to learn and develop together. So as John, there'll probably be some repetition here, so I apologise.
You're only going to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm only introducing myself.
Still?
Yeah. No. I'm now going on to the system, John.
Okay.
This isn't a carry-on act. So FIX, Farm Information Exchange, is an industry-neutral digital platform, as John has already said, that will connect farmers to farmers, farmers to science, and farmers to commerce, all from one central place. And a really important part of that is industry neutrality and ensuring the enduring neutrality of that. So the system is agnostic to other data systems in terms of what can come into it. It's also not predetermined, and that also means it can evolve with time. It's not dated. So new technologies will come along, new types of data, new learnings, and that can all feed into it. But if I gave an analogy, it's a bit like the Tupperware container for the farm. So you don't have to do anything with the data. It can just sit there. But it enables it to come in and actually see things layered for the first time, see different things that might have impact on other totally disconnected areas that you didn't really think before were connected. And I think the neutrality part also promotes good farming. I think there's a lot of talk around different approaches and what's better. But the one thing we know with farming is everything is different in different scenarios. People do things for different reasons, but they can still have good outcomes. Not many people set out to be a bad farmer. So what we want the system to do is enable the evidencing, or what it can do is enable the evidencing of what an individual farm is doing, and show why they're doing it. And it can really then tell the story of the farm. And this is useful to all people really sort of that are interconnected with the farm. And it removes the tension as well from environmental aspects and food production. So it's driving sort of what we're calling an enhanced environmental production method, because you're monitoring your productivity, costs, all different things around all the different elements of your business, because you've got to stay in business, otherwise you're in trouble. But it's also enabling the environmental uplifts at the same time. But being able to evidence that, being able to demonstrate where you were yesterday, where you are today, and where you can be tomorrow. And so it can then report, whether that be a local bakery, whether it be a water company, an insurance company, government, whoever, from one central point you can drive efficiency. The farm can understand, the farm is in control of their data, so they can understand what they're sharing, with who they're sharing it, and what the value proposition for sharing that information is. And they can also then bring context to that data, as I've already said. That then drives, really drives the value of that data. So you can sort of build a diary. So the system brings in photographs, videos, audio, all sorts of supporting aspects to the data. Data on its own has a very limited use, and the people who know that data best are the farmers. And if we then go back to evidence tracking as well, it drives a robust method of reporting. From the business side, we're talking to a lot of businesses who are now needing to take sustainability off the page of the brochure, which is where it has predominantly been and is still, and actually turn that into action. But that's pretty risky. It comes with a high risk, because people are searching for an answer, and if you leap to an answer that's the wrong one, that could be very costly. Finance will dismantle a business pretty quickly, but reputation can dismantle the finances, which will dismantle the business. So people have got to be sure of what they are backing, and there are no easy answers in this. So again, that's why the system connects the information, which then helps learning evolve, and that's really what is being supported. It's that learning journey, but knowing that that's coming from robust information. It's coming from shared information, and it's a little bit like I think the analogy for that could be Amazon. They're a very successful company, and it's because they have large digital connectivity. They try new things every day. It's not necessarily particularly obvious, but they find what fails and what works. And so by having large data connectivity between farming in this way, then new innovations and new successes can be discovered. I think the other thing that we're picking up from the business point of view as well is that that businesses are wishing for direct link. They're wishing for information to come from the farmers, because, as I've already said, the farm knows the data best. But it also increases the value of that, because then there's no one in the middle with a vested interest who might be shaping data for any particular reasons. The data is then it's reported in an efficient way, a continuous way, and as I've said many times now, it's also robust. And the last thing I'm going to say is we've built integration to make it easy for lots of different information to come in, which also drives the possibility for digital clusters and learning between farms. So we can take, with permissions, the system can take information off WhatsApp chats. I think if you look at clusters and how much information sits within WhatsApp chats, it must be huge. But what actually happens to that information? Does it ever get taken off? Does it ever get used? Do you ever get a benefit from it? And so we can now start to take benefits from all these different areas. So I'm going to finish there, John. But I think we'll move on to questions and things later.
Yeah, I think the way we'll do it, the plan is not to talk for too long and to have a discussion, because it's much better. It's hard to know how to pitch and what the hooks are for a diverse audience. So I think the quicker we move on to discussion, the better. But we'll go through the different perspectives to begin with and then open up for a wide discussion. Evie, you want to give the farmer's perspective on this? I should say that Evie's helping us massively as part of a core farmer group that's making sure that we make this relevant and presentable to a wider farming community before we make idiots of ourselves.
Thank you, John. So my name's Evie Hunter. I'm an arable farmer on my family farm here in Hertfordshire. I first heard about Fix after a soil science talk that John did with Team Ag, who we also use for our agronomy. So I just wanted to speak about a few reasons I think Fix will work to improve and complement our farming business and hopefully many others. We like the fact that it's to be co-created with farmers. As John's just explained, I'm part of a sort of group to try and build it. And that there's sort of endless possibilities. So on our family farm, we're constantly trialling new ideas and equipment with the aim of becoming more efficient and, of course, more profitable. This is especially important for us as we're solely tenant farmers and contract farmers. Therefore, we have very little control over the land that we're farming. We're often seeing land removed from our arable rotations for SFI, mineral extraction, housing developments. And I'd say we currently have probably a gap in our data consolidation and being able to look at our data in more detail and, more importantly, in one place where it can be more useful and more usable would be very beneficial. Another draw to the platform is obviously the opportunity to eventually be able to sell this data and add value to our products and maybe target specific markets, which is usually difficult with bulk commodities such as cereal crops. I think the platform's really a new, exciting way to tell our farming stories. Also, we've been fortunate in our business to have worked with the local water companies on reducing certain chemicals in our catchment. And I believe water companies are going to be working with Fix to engage with farmers on a catchment scale. And this will open up additional income streams to more farmers. As well as this interaction, farmers will have direct access to scientists and scientific data and facts via the platform, something that we've never really had opportunity to have before. Sorry, I didn't make this sound like a list. It's just, so another opportunity we see is the potential for benchmarking that doesn't mirror the traditional classroom environment where you've got to drag yourself away from the farm for the day. Instead, it will be available at your fingertips on your smartphone or in the office. Because I believe, or we believe on our farm, that farmers need to help each other. We all have vaguely the same goal, and I'd guarantee there's always something to be learnt from each other. Being able to share ideas amongst like-minded people, like we are today, isn't an opportunity to be missed. There's probably still a debate about whether farmers always want to help each other and share ideas, and you'll never get everyone on board. But the people who do wish to share and learn from each other should have an appropriate place to do so. And I think as long as farmers can trust Fix, even if they don't want to share their information at the start, it can still be used to gain information. I compared it with John the other day to if you're on a fitness app like Strava, you might want to watch and follow people, but until you're at your sub 30-minute 5K, you might not want to share your information, which is fine. I think lastly, it's become very apparent in recent times that we need to take control over our own data. Farmers are quite prone to giving it away too easily or perhaps unknowingly. If we can gain back ownership and control of it with a farmer-owned and controlled platform, we can decide whether to share it or not, who with, and hopefully for a profit. And I hope that in a few years' time we can be surprised, excited with what's been achieved with Fix. Thank you.
Thanks, Evie. And we'll just finish with a science perspective from Andy.
Thank you, John. So yeah, my name's Andy Neal. I'm a soil microbiologist, and being a microbiologist is very instructive for how humans work, because it didn't take long for John and I to talk. We actually shared an office, so we had a lot of talking to do before we could understand what each other was saying. But we eventually came to an understanding that really the way we viewed soil was that it in effect, it's a network of networks. And what we mean by that is that to understand how soil works, we needed to understand how and by what way or by what vector organisms interact with each other in soil. And it was once we'd got that, it was very easy to understand that the soil porosity is really what controls all of that. And it controls many things in soil. But of course, connectivity is also a really good metaphor for how we learn together, how we share information, and particularly how farmers learn, because they don't trust us, John. I think we both accept that, but they trust their peers. And so if we were to create something a method to get scientific understanding of soil and other aspects of agricultural systems to be most effective, it has to be passed to farmers to discuss and share between themselves. As a scientist also, I talk to a lot of farmers, and I often end up defending, not myself, but all the scientists for not working with farmers very well at all and not being prepared to share our understandings very effectively. And I think that's a fair criticism in many cases. It's not fair of all of us, and there are some of my colleagues who do an enormous amount of talking to farmers, but there's no recognized effective way to do that. We're not rewarded for it. No one really cares whether we talk to you or not. You are reliant on us to really have the enthusiasm to do that. And so a platform like Fix allows us to do that, to share that enthusiasm of what we're finding out about soil, and most importantly, for us to do work that is relevant to what farmers need. Because the other criticism I hear from farmers is that it's all very well being an academic, but you end up going down such a blind alley, it ends up not being particularly relevant to us as practitioners. And so it became obvious to me when we were discussing FIX that it solves two of those problems, particularly about how science and scientists interface with farmers. And we really need to do that right now, because the way Groundswell is advocating farming is radically different from what we've experienced in the past. And we know a lot about how soils perform in systems that are degrading them. That's what soil science has been developing for the last century. But it's different now. Soils are now not being degraded. You are all taking a lot of effort to rebuild them. And yet you're doing that in a vacuum of knowledge, because we haven't had the experience and the capacity to study soils as they're improving. So right now, science needs to engage very seriously with what you're doing on the farm and inform you of what is working and what is not working, and you informing us of what it is you really need to know, what the key messages are, the key questions that need asking. And so this becomes a format to do that and to change the way we all collectively do science focused on agriculture in a radically different way than has been tried before. So I don't want to say any more about the science, but it's just it allows us to do this in a much more connected, effective, and informative way than we would have ever been able to do it in the past. So I'll sit down now.
That's great. And I like the analogy between, you know, the soil and humans and farming. When I try to explain what we're doing to my wife, I've got a very short window of opportunity. and the way I explain, you know, when we talk about farming with nature, what does that mean, farming with nature rather than against nature? Nature is massively innovative. It's a hugely creative thing. And it creates by sharing ideas, genes. And within those genes is a whole history of knowledge through evolution of what works and what doesn't work. And nature is more creative now than it's ever been. It's exactly the same process by which innovation happens in farming, sharing knowledge, trying stuff. 98% of the experiments on biodiversity didn't work. 2% did, but what a 2%, it's amazing. Trying stuff on a massive scale, on a planetary scale. What works, what doesn't work, how important is context, and how does context affect what you might do on your own farm? These are all pieces of knowledge that are currently inaccessible to science and inaccessible to farmers, but they are accessible in principle because we are massively connected, much more now than even we were last year, and certainly massively much more when I started my science career. Science just hasn't caught up with that. So, I'd like to open up. Usually when we talk about this stuff to farmers, there's a pause of silence. And then somebody will volunteer a question, and then suddenly there's a pile-on about, oh, you could do this, we could do that, we could do this. It's much better when it's interactive and discussive, which is why we've left a lot of time for discussion. And we've got one question already, and I think there's a floating mic.
Hi there, my name is Betty. I'm from a farming background, but I work in tech. You said about how farmers tend to give away their information without realizing. I'm not really sure. Could you maybe clarify on that? And also, in terms of like this being, you framed it like a sort of Strava app where they can like publicize what they're doing on their farm. Would it be like a social media, or like how would they actually share the data? Yeah.
Who wants to take do farmers care about giving the data away? Do you want to take that, Kiryon?
I think it's a really good question, and I think they do. But as with all these things, there's different levels. So different people have an understanding of what's going on to different degrees. So there are lots of new things coming in to affect land production at the moment. So, whether it be financed emissions, whether it be someone looking for an ESG story, and this is what we're getting at. Different businesses have different needs, and so they're coming in and they're asking the farm business for information. And some people will give it, and some people won't. And some people realise why, but probably not many of them, because the requirements are away from tradition. And I think the other thing this links to is we've also got to be careful of what's adding value and what's building a liability, and that's why the learning part's really important, because we don't really know the detail behind a lot of these things that are being claimed. And so people are jumping to conclusions because it seems on the surface of it great. And to an extent, again, direct interaction with business, and if someone sells something which then turns out to be false, this is something we're involved in at the moment through the system. Where does the liability sit on that? Because a private institution could come back and say, actually, I was missold that. It could be the next mis-selling scandal. So it's got a long way of answering the question, but it's actually quite interlinked that I think, yes, farmers are interacting in lots of different ways, but I don't necessarily think interfacing industry is always being honest with exactly why they are asking for the information and what they're doing with it.
I'd just add a little bit to that and then invite Evie to comment from a farmer's perspective as well. I set up the UK Centre for Excellence in Big Data for the Agri-Food sector in 2015 or something like that. And before I did that, I got 25 big, well, mostly big global corporates into the boardroom at PricewaterhouseCoopers in London and said, "What do you want?" And I had 25 blank faces looking back at me. I think everybody recognized that digital and data was really important for their future businesses, but it was a bit like teenage sex. Everybody knew that everybody thought they should be doing something, but they didn't really know what it was. And I think that's still the case in the sense that digital is, in many cases, seen as an add-on. So it's a way of doing what we already do, but maybe a little bit faster or more efficient. Coming from my background, it is a game changer. If your organization is not undergoing a total digital transformation that isn't reinventing the future, you're missing a trick. I honestly think that having the ability to share data's quite boring, but what you do with it can be amazing, especially if it's on a massive scale. And that's why I'm so keen for farmers to grasp that opportunity before the rest of the planet really gets it, because I do think it will be a really valuable asset. So I think that not necessarily everybody really recognizes the value of knowledge and data until it's shared on a massive scale, and then it's really, really valuable. Evie?
First part of your question, I think one example, if we've done like a benchmarking exercise in the past, it's normally run by a company or sort of an agency, and you're happily there because you're learning your information, but at the same time you're giving it away to them. So that's probably how I'd answer that. And the second part, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the platform is, the sort of homepage is designed to be kind of like a dashboard and sort of mirror social media platforms, so it's like familiar to use, and you can add, I think the possibilities of what you can add on there are endless, and that's sort of your way of telling your story, that sort of homepage.
I think the storytelling bit's really important. People don't change what they do because of data, they change what they do because of stories. So sharing stories is a really important part of this. I'll give you the...
3 words. Who's making money?
hopefully the farm's making more money. Because this is, so the whole point of this, and actually, so we're building it for farmers and managing it for farmers, but is to help maximize the value potential for the farm level. So why, you're shaking your head, which is great, this is interactive, so why don't you believe that? Because that's a really important point, because we've gone to great lengths to build a model to ensure enduring neutrality, so that the learnings, as I said, can be robust. So the learning you get, so it really allows 3 lots of learning at the same time. You have the learning of the science and actually the physical elements of what's going on. You have the market learning, because the market's maturing at the moment, markets aren't there, and you get price discovery as well. So with the market it's sort of maturing, we don't really know what the values of this are, and yet actually measurement, there are a lot of companies selling measurements and things for aspects of this, and actually that could end up being too expensive for the reward. So it's trying to bring the farm value to an optimal point rather than jumping too soon and then realising you spent too much.
If you have 100 farmers on your system, and 3 are making money and 97 are in Bolivia and are not, who's making the money?
So are you talking about a global equity issue?
Not everybody is going to get an even share of this.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Not everybody is going to get an even share of this.
Oh, yeah, blimey. Look, I totally agree with that. And one of the issues that, when you think globally about where knowledge and power resides, it's very uneven, for sure. And that is something that we will have to be very mindful of, and is why we're working with an organization like the World's Farmers Organization that represents all of the world's farmers to help us with that. But we're also working with organizations linked to the UN that are absolutely obsessed with this issue of inequity and the self-reinforcement, and the dangers of us creating a kind of a knowledge colonization of developing countries. So that's something we're aware of, and something that we will have to address.
Thank you very much for the talk so far. You talk about scale. AI has come about really quickly, and what it's shown to me is lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of information is instant. And so diversity and lots and lots and lots of different farmers and their data kind of slightly starts to shift at that point. I know from a bit of a study that certifications cost more the more farmers there are on a landscape. So it's built in negative feedback loops towards the farmers who are probably doing better work towards diversity. When you talk about scale and data, do you think this will start to shift the power away from growth and uniformity back towards diversity?
I think the platform is predicated on diversity. What we know is there is no one-size-fits-all. And I was at a talk earlier when we're talking about impacts and whether you measure impact in terms of process or outcome. Well, it has to be outcome. Are you getting regenerative outcomes, not are you doing regenerative practices? And how you get those outcomes will vary from place to place. And the potential of sharing the fact that farmers are trying many, many different things should, in principle, actually increase the diversity. Coming back to the analogy with how nature does it, the biodiversity has increased since life pretty much flat. There's been some mass extinctions, but the biodiversity has always come back higher. So there's an increasing rate of creativity and diversity over time through the exchange and recombination of ideas. But it's a hypothesis, right? We have to see.
Thanks. Hi, Shirley, working from Yagro. Touching on diversity of data, there's a lot of data in the world, on the agri world. You speak about robust method. How do you go about it? What's your method? Because the data in farm are so diverse. If you want to compare or use it for scientists to prove anything, you need to make sure you compare the same thing. So what's your method? How you go about this robust method? And which kind of data as well? Because what sits beyond data? Is it the sales, the price of a grain, the price of a ton, what you apply in the soil information? What's the data you are speaking about?
It's a great question, and something that's come up in a number of the sessions I've been at is that how do you measure impact? So even in soil health, what should you be measuring? And that's why we need this partnership with the science. The science needs to move with farmers and be connected to farming to help. We can get started, but the point is that we should be trying to get better over time. Andy, do you want to elaborate on what kind of how science and farming interact to help decide what it is farmers need to be measuring to know whether they're on the right track?
Well, I think where we are now is that we measure a lot of things because we can measure them. And then we kind of, after the fact, try and sort of determine what it is that's healthy about that. And I think that's why we have a lot of uncertainty. And even after all this time of studying soil, where we still don't have a set of key metrics, and we're still all arguing about it. I think what John and I set out to do 10 years ago, if that's true, John, is it 10 years? Was to understand really how soil works and what it is that we should be measuring, rather than just asking, well, if we can measure this, then we need to interpret it as a healthy scale. So the science needs to provide a robust argument for why we should be measuring anything if it is related to health. And more importantly, the reason why it's healthy and what the theory is that underpins that. We lack anything like that at the moment because we haven't, because we haven't been able to look at soil effectively. We've not been able to, for instance, look inside soil. So we've had to try and determine what a healthy soil is by looking at a very opaque system, physically opaque. But technology now allows us to look inside soil and start to understand the structures and the architecture of soil and interpret it in hydrodynamic ways, which was never available 20, 30 years ago. Other technological advances, such as the ability to sequence and look at how communities change, not the very limited number of organisms that we can grow, tells us something about how the whole system reflects and responds to the way it's managed. So I think we're at a point now where we have much more useful tools to develop theories and test them robustly and come back with metrics that was never possible in the past. So I don't think there's anything that we could really use as a single metric at the moment. But the point is, by working collectively with lots of people in different soil types and using different approaches, is that we can determine what the limited number of measures are that are descriptive of healthy and successful systems. So I think this very exercise will help develop what we're all looking for at the moment, which is a limited and trustworthy set of measurements that we can all believe in. Oh, believe in, that's the wrong word, I suppose. That we can all use in a robust and trustworthy way. So I think it will help that rather than fudge the issue. Does that answer your question effectively? No? Yeah, okay. No, it's not just the soil, that's my experience of the system.
But, I mean, it's a very good point. So in terms of biodiversity, there is not still a consensus on that. And the thing about delivering impact at scale fast, the science needs to be aligned with that mission as well. So whatever measurements you've had to be scalable and affordable. So it's not just about what does science say. The science has to be in the context of being able to roll something out fast at scale. different kind of science. Oh no, a scientist is going to ask a question.
That's right. He's got a silly hat on. It won't be quite so serious.
He's got a silly hat on, that's true.
So you spoke about the exponential growth of knowledge with increased connectivity.
Hyperbolic.
But in the early days, you need a critical mass of users and
Yeah,
a critical
you do.
mass of data to demonstrate that value.
100%.
In the early days, when the curve is going like that and is parochial, how are you going to demonstrate value and how are you going to generate enthusiasm?
My view is that's the biggest challenge we face right now. We need to get from 0 to 1,000 farmers in a convincing way, and build enough functionality into the platform. So we've got a prototype which has functionality built in. We need to get at least 1,000 farmers on the platform, and we need to make it interesting and attractive enough for them to do that. And those will be early adopters, and they'll want to have a view on what additional functionality is needed. But getting from 0 to 1,000 is the challenge that we're wrestling with right now. It's a very good point.
Hi, I'm Carl. I work for a strategy consulting firm, but I think the question I wanted to ask you was particularly around benchmarking of data. So I know there's loads of different variables that you have on a farm. How do you make sure that the information you get from the farm is actually useful for each farm that you get? And I know you plan to take this global. So how do you make sure that you ensure the same kind of standards that you have in the UK with those Bolivia farmers, with all over the world, essentially?
I think pragmatically, that is going to be an evolutionary process, and we'll take what we can get, with the caveat that bad data can sometimes be worse than no data. So how that data is used is a slightly different question. What's the point I was going to make? I think we have to accept, and there's a bit of a trade-off. If you've got enough data, you can put up with a bit of imprecision with some subset of that data. You can still get signal against noise if you've got enough data. And over time, you would hope always to be reducing that signal to noise. And one scalable way to do that is to adopt remote sensing technologies. I don't just mean satellites, I mean in-field sensors and things like that. Not necessarily everywhere, but in certain locations that allow you then to sense check the data that you're getting elsewhere by using proxy measurements.
Hi, my question goes back to the one previous a bit, really. So there's lots of grain trading companies out there asking you to do things like sustainability surveys, and they're basically taking that information to hit their ESG targets for free. How do you think you want to reverse that kind of culture, which is already starting to get a foothold in the market?
Because I suppose one of the things this then does is it gets people to think about what value that information has. So it comes back, like you said, to an earlier question. Actually, people ask for things and people think, well, I can't really see the relevance of it, have it. Because they don't realise what else is going on, because farming's a pretty involved job, and especially at this time of year. There's a lot going on. And I think, there is also, there's a circle of trust within farming. You have people on the farm who've been doing things for years, and they might come up and they might ask for different things. You don't really question why they want it or what they're going to do with it. But I think what information is being used for is changing. So I think that's happening without it. So the short answer is, I think it'll get people thinking about it and get them to realise that actually this does have a value. And probably an increasing value to businesses. But like I also said earlier, that value increases with reliability as well.
Probably time for maybe one more question after this.
This is another data question, I'm afraid. Data is absolutely useless to science and business unless it's comparable. Walking around here, I see an awful lot of walled garden data gathering going on.
Yeah.
The task of making that data comparable is monumental.
Yep.
And requires information that's extremely difficult to obtain. Where are you with that?
So my point is that we don't have a choice, right? I'm now obsessed with the fact that we have to make a real, genuine impact globally fast. You know, we've run out of time essentially, and the sooner we do it, the better. We're going to have to make do with what we've got. So not having data can't be an excuse for inaction, but we have to approach the problem creatively. We have to use proxies. We have to use whatever we can, but aim on the longer term to get data so you are comparing apples with apples and not apples with spiders. But to begin with, that cannot be an excuse for inaction. We have to be creative enough to deal with that. That's the challenge to the science community, really, is to come up with a clear signal of what to measure and how to do it. And that's needed anyway for, I was in the value chain session earlier, and they're kind of crying out for clear guidance from the science on how do you measure impact, and everybody needs to be measuring impact in the same way.
It matters much less how you measure it, and much more whether those measurements are made the same everywhere. Yeah, you can take out the bias in the measurements if the measurements are comparable. But if you don't know where the bias is in the measurements, you've got a problem. And how do you get Strada to export data to your platform?
Many of the, well, Kiryon knows this, many of the platforms that claim to have farmers' data say they don't own it, which means that all of these platforms should enable farmers to access their own data and put it where they like. Better take one last question. I think this lady had a hand up first.
Hi, I'm a farmer in Northern Ireland. You mentioned that it's farmer-owned data, but once we would put that data onto an open platform, it's like an open source by the signs of it, then how do you stop it from being taken by other people? So
the controls are with the farmer. You're absolutely... So when we set up Agrimetrics, we worried a lot about who owns the data, and that's a question that makes lawyers a lot of money but doesn't actually get farmers any further. It's all about who controls. Do you have control over your data, and who sees it and who shares it? That's now all possible. So the controls are with the farmer, and you might not even ever want to share your raw data, but you might want to share processed data, for example, like a calculation from the CoFarm tool, for example, you might want to share as a benchmarking and figure out how well you're doing compared to other farms. The control must be with the farmer. But that's all possible now. Thanks very much for the questions and discussion. And if anybody didn't get their favorite question, I don't think there's anybody coming in here after us. No. So if you want to come up and talk directly, we can do that. Thanks very much.